Jedd Fisch is betting big on young freshmen like Raiden Vines-Bright.
You are Locked On Huskies, your daily podcast on the Washington Huskies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back into another edition of the Locked On Huskies podcast. I'm Roman Tomashoff. That's Lars Hansen. He writes with me over at Huskies Wire. Thank you for making this your first watch or first listen of the days. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And just a quick reminder to all you everydayers, wherever you get this podcast, YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music, make sure to click that subscribe button, click the little bell down below as well, so you never miss when we post a new show. Plus, if you're on the audio-only side of things, please make sure to leave us a 5-star review, as all that really does help the channel out a lot. Now, Lars, we are just getting back from Jedd Fisch's first press conference of the real football season. We couldn't be more excited. So with that being said, we got a really fun show coming at all you everydayers out there today. We're going to talk about some of the most intriguing matchups that we've highlighted in this upcoming game against Colorado State. We want to talk about some of the biggest surprises from the depth chart. But Lars, the biggest takeaway that I think everybody came away with from Jedd's first presser of the true football season is that he is betting big on young talent. There are 6 members of the class of 2025 on the opening depth chart, which is probably going to stay that way for the entire season, with one bona fide starter in wide receiver Raiden Vines-Bright.
And it's ironically the same number of the freshmen that ended up, playing more than 4 games last season, where UW had 19. I think they played 13 total, but 6 of those guys ended up, being starters or significant contributors. And the thing that I look at,
one thing though, it also speaks volumes to the over/under of 6.5 freshmen burning their red shirts that we said on this here podcast.
Reason for that being, when you look at this class, the guy that's also not listed that's probably going to play a lot is Rylon Dillard-Allen. And so for me, you look at this and say, Raiden absolutely earned it, as Jedd Fisch said. And I wrote about it a little bit, that'll be up on Huskies Wire, where it's had he been fully healthy for the entire spring, I'm not even sure there'd be an or next to him. And when I asked Jedd Fisch today about it, where he revealed that Raiden will start against Colorado State, to me, it was like, you know what? Why not? It's more of like hey, we'll give him the first start. And then if he's able to, go for, let's say 5 catches, 50 yards, and, shows himself to be able to contribute on Saturdays, I think he'll continue to get reps. Whereas, and that's why you brought Omari in, to push him, but not usurp him guaranteed.
So I want to take this back to our depth chart prediction show from last week, where, as the everydayers know, we got the good majority of what was going to happen on the 2 deeps correct. One thing that we missed was we had Kevin Green as the starting third receiver. I think we had an or for who it could have been with Omari in that mix, Raiden Vines-Bright as well. And I think the thing with Raiden is this is the long-term play, which is, again, the biggest thing that I came away with from this press conference today when you talk about John Mills, who's also going to be in this group. But I look at Raiden in particular, and throughout the spring, throughout the fall, whenever he was on the field, he just made plays. And I think the run blocking was a big thing that was, just kind of the kudos to Kevin Green in that department. But with Raiden, it's very obvious that we know he can stretch the field. We know he can make plays with the ball in his hands after the catch. We saw it in the spring game. And that was, again, something that Jedd said was every time that the ball was thrown his way, he showed up and he made a play, which is also why Dezmen Roebuck, as you pointed out, found his way onto the depth chart, where there are so many different guys you can just go up and down this roster and look at this is what we've been talking about throughout the summer. And Jedd's comments today made it very, very obvious how excited he is about the long-term potential of this team. There are so many guys that are freshmen, redshirt freshmen, sophomores that have 2-3 years of eligibility remaining, in some cases 4. And just with the way this roster is building, why not start Raiden? Why not give him as many opportunities as possible to go out there, especially in these first couple of games? And if he shows up, great, you keep throwing him out there. And if not, you have so many other veteran options in this room that you can say, hey, we'll still find ways to get you into the game, and we'll still let you make plays. We'll still devise ways to get the ball into your hands. But if not, we can go with one of these older guys, which, again, as you said, is why you bring in a guy like Omari Evans, who we know he can stretch the field. We know he can make plays for you 15, 20 yards. I think one of my predictions from a few weeks ago was that if he leads the team in yards per reception, I don't think you or I will be shocked. But again, that also just kind of lends to what Raiden brings to the table. There's so many different things that you can do with a guy like that. And it also helps when, we look at the left guard spot, and no matter who's out there, John Mills or Paki Finau, Jedd Fisch is very clearly confident in this offensive line.
It's why we always say just continue to stack talent on the roster and let it sort itself out. Whether John and you look at like the offensive line class, much like the wide receiver class, you brought in a lot of bodies. Not all those guys were ever going to play. It was, and I think Dezmen's kind of a hallmark of that. Where I know several people in and around the program. It's like had he come in the spring, it would have been almost guaranteed just by the way he approaches the game. What we saw in fall camp, we would have also saw in spring, but because he wasn't able to enroll until June. It was a little more of a surprise, but like we said on that depth show prediction show, why not include Dezmen? Because he's given you no reason not to play him. Now, how many targets does he get? How much, what's the total snap count? That's yet to be determined because in Jedd's offense, it's not always, 3, 4, 5 receiver sets. It's really, 2 receiver sets, maybe the occasional third. And so for, when it comes to snap counts, games, things like that, we'll see where it goes. But from both those guys and John Mills, like you mentioned, that's especially, with Jedd being an offensive coordinator, the offensive-minded guy that he is, it speaks volumes to how highly he views them. And we kind of heard it throughout the presser today.
Yeah, absolutely. That is such a big part of this. And again, it goes back to everything that you and I have been saying throughout the summer, is that these young guys are going to be such an integral part of this program, both this season and beyond. And obviously that goes beyond, Demond Williams. Denzel Boston is a name that Jedd throughout the day is, even though we fully expect him to be gone for the NFL draft after this season. There are so many young building blocks that you can point to on this roster and say, if that guy is a Husky that's contributing for 2, 3, 4 seasons, I'm not going to be shocked. And I think John Mills is the perfect example of that because we've gotten a lot of questions with, hey, is this, a concern for Pocky Finau? Absolutely not. I couldn't, believe that any firmer, where no matter who starts, John Mills or Pocky Finau, this offensive line is going to be improved greatly because of the talent and the physicality that those two guys bring to the offensive line. And if, in each of the first 2 games, it really is a drive-by-drive rotation, then so be it. You're happy with what both these guys have brought to the table. And if you want to give them as many opportunities to prove themselves, great, go for it. Do it. It's something you and I talked about last week as well, where if John Mills is your left tackle next season, you got to make sure he's got as many reps as you can under his belt right now. And as for Pocky, that's a guy who certainly looks like a building block for this offensive line as well, with everything he can bring on the interior or at tackle as well. So when we look at what these guys bring to the table, I'm sure that there are, people in this fan base and people around the Big Ten that might look at it and say, oh, there's a lot of youth on this roster, a lot of inexperience. But it just feels like this coaching staff is very comfortable with the mix of veteran guys on both sides of the ball, plus this young talent and what that can do this fall.
And you mentioned on both sides of the ball, that's kind of when you point to Dylan Robinson being listed, I think, behind Tacario Davis, if I'm not mistaken. You look at it and say, you didn't bring Tacario in to, challenge Dylan Robinson in that sense, because you always knew if you're bringing Tacario Davis, one of if not the top 3 guys in the transfer portal when he committed to Washington, that was we just want the best cornerback in the country to come back to our coaching staff effectively. But that's also why you bring in a high 4-star like Dylan Robinson who can say, you know what, you're going to play. You might not play, 8, 9, 10 games. We'll see how it ends up coming to fruition. But you look at it and say, learn from Tacario, kind of like how Penix, knows, quarterbacks usually do, where you learn behind a veteran. Demond did with Will. Just soak up as much as you can so that when you take over next season as a guarantee, as a guy that we both view as a guaranteed starter next season, that is going to be invaluable experience for him, no matter how many games it ends up being or what the snap count looks like.
No, absolutely. And, that just kind of leads perfectly into the discussion that the biggest shock that was excluded from the depth chart was Rylon Dillard-Allen. And we'll get to that right after a message from our good friends over at FanDuel. August 26th is officially FanDuel Futures Day, a brand new holiday for football fans who live for bold predictions and preseason hunches. For just 24 hours, FanDuel is giving you deals on NFL season predictions. So whether you're calling your MVP, eyeing a long shot division winner, or ready to crown your Super Bowl champ before week 1 even kicks off, this is your moment. And for anybody who's looking for a long shot division winner like I am, I love those long shot bets. I love Michael Penix Jr. and the Atlanta Falcons. I love this just trio of stars that they have with Mike, running back Bijan Robinson, wide receiver Drake London. I love what these guys bring to the table. If that defense can take a step forward, shout out to Brayden Trice, by the way, if he can help just in a little more pass rush in this unit. I really do believe that the Falcons can get over the hump. They only finished 1 game back in the division last year. They can beat out the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and get back to the playoffs for the first time in 2017. You should go check out those odds. Visit the FanDuel app today and start planning your futures bets now, because Futures Day is 1 day and 1 day only. FanDuel, play your game. Lars, we've had a lot of everydayers asked to incorporate some more visuals into the show. So that being said, let's just throw up Washington's depth chart here for a minute. And as we take a look at this, there are some really interesting inclusions and a few really interesting exclusions as well, where I think the biggest one, as you pointed out a little bit earlier, is the fact that Washington went with sophomore Vincent Holmes over true freshman Rylon Dillard-Allen. But one thing that I know we wanted to make sure we got out there, because we've gotten a lot of questions about this depth chart is strictly a guide for the time being, where let's just talk about Zach Durfee and Isaiah Ward there for a second. I know they're listed as co-starters. If we see those guys lined up across from each other a lot this year, don't be shocked. With that being said, please take it away.
Yeah, in a way, I'm not surprised, just because when Vince was out there, it was kind of a quiet success, almost like not Hayden Moore-esque, but just a guy that was a solid contributor, a guy that, especially with his size and range, I think 6'1", 180, somewhere in that ballpark, you can look and say, we'll give you a chance early, and then if Rylon usurps you by, call it week 7, week 8, neither of us will be surprised. And that's not necessarily a knock on Vince. It's just we know the high-end potential that Rylon Dillard-Allen has. And you saw with the pick 6 in the mock game and things like that throughout fall camp. And to me, it was, again, am I surprised that he at least wasn't listed? Yeah, but it would also kind of look wonky if one safety position has 3 guys and one has 2, because when you look at the depth at that safety room, you could, with Raheem Wright being out, a few other guys, they got shots at that position, but we really always said it was going to be 5 guys, and Rylon was always at 5th. So the fact that he was excluded to me is not necessarily a surprise, but a little bit of a talking point, if you will.
So, and that's kind of why we wanted to bring it up, because it was a surprise to me. And I just think that you're right. Vincent Holmes was a quiet contributor throughout fall camp, but I just think that it wasn't just the plays that Rylon made in terms of some of the big hits and everything. It was the consistent speed and physicality that he brought to the table every single day. And I think that's something that is more than worth mentioning, because it's something when you got to talk to him back during spring, before spring practice, when you went to an NIL event over in U Village, where he said, yeah, I'm fully expecting to play this year. And we fully still expect him to play and burn his red shirt, where that could come on special teams, a la Peyton Waters last season. And I think it's still something worth mentioning, because especially when we talk about the depth chart being a guide, where if we get to the end of the year and Rylon has more snaps at safety than Vincent Holmes does, that's also something that you shouldn't necessarily be surprised by. But it's still just kind of a talking point, especially where we haven't been able to watch fall camp for the final, week plus or so, as they kind of get into game preparation and different things like that. So if Vince made a jump over this last week or so, great, that's good for him, because it, again, just plays into what we've been talking about, that there's so much depth at the position. And I feel like that extends all the way across the defense too. Yeah,
when you look at the secondary alone, you have everybody over 6'1", like 6'1" or above. I guess, Leroy's listed at 6'4", but certainly plays like he's 6'1", but still, it's a matter of semantics, and just, now Jedd can say, hey, this is the longest cornerback, average cornerback or secondary we've had ever, like, that I've been a coach. Those type of things where it doesn't really matter, but you want to see how it comes to fruition. And again, it doesn't prevent anybody from, outperforming or just taking a job. And by the way, even when they do, you still won't probably see a change in the depth chart. Like, it's not going to be like, oh, hey, magically this guy's now 1 or above. It's really, especially as we've gone along in college football, it's coaches' kind of way of saying, here's, names to know. Like when fans get that, pregame guide and it says, hey, look at number 56 in your program or whatever. It's number whatever on your depth chart. It's there. Here's these guys. But then, by the way, turn over and here's the roster, which, there's plenty of guys where you can look at the defensive line and say that as well with Armand Parker, another guy who wasn't listed on the depth chart, but a guy that we fully expect to be contributors. But I did notice, in a way, much like when you're pointing out, the last couple of weeks we haven't seen anything. Sounds like Alenius Davis has made some headway, and Bryce Butler is a guy that we've also highlighted on the podcast as well numerous times, saying watch out for him as well. And just the depth and rotation, you have more than 6 guys along the interior D line, which A, is crazy to say compared to what you had last season. Then B, there's still so much potential in that room. You're not concerned that, oh, hey, this guy's listed and this guy's not. Well, you can make that argument literally about all 8 guys in the room.
So let's talk about the defensive line a little bit further, because one thing that I've seen, we got a couple of questions from some everydayers on Twitter about, was this front where it's, oh, hey, why isn't, Simone Peppa listed as a starter? I thought, there were some things to be noted there, where if we look at this depth chart a little bit closer, I'm going to have some fun here. And hey, look at that. That looks so much better. I love where this is going. But as we kind of look at where this depth chart is, there are only 4 defensive linemen listed. And for all the everydayers who did get a chance to watch our prediction, so we threw out 12 potential starters on defense, depending on what the scheme is going to look like, as Jedd Fisch said today, that that Ryan Walters has certainly left his stamp on this defense. And a lot of that is this 5-down bear look where, again, so when we look at these top 6 defensive linemen, I would take Samote Peppa and Logan Sagapolu out of this equation because in a 5-down front, one of those two is going to start at a true nose tackle position. So I think that that's something to be considered here when, especially we look at just the way this depth is going to shape up with a guy like Armand Parker. There are so many different ways to utilize guys like that where maybe, X3 Alexander at inside linebacker is another example. Maybe he plays more snaps at outside by the time the season is all said and done. Maybe Taitaio Iungalale floats a little bit more if Elenius Davis just continues to take a step forward and they love Tai and want to keep him on the field, but Elenius is just someone you need to have at that 3-tech or something, and you want to kick Tai out to play a little bit more outside linebacker. There are so many different ways that this defensive line can – I don't want to just say beat you. I want to say that they can just figure it out themselves in terms of the amount of guys that they can throw out there that we just didn't see last season. And that is the most important thing that I've taken away from just looking at this depth chart and seeing questions from some everydayers, from different Husky fans just out in the Twitterverse, is this defensive line in particular is just so much deeper than it was at any point last season. That's something that we've been trying to hammer home all summer. And I'm just really excited to get a chance to watch that on the field on Saturday. Excuse me.
And what's ironic, better not be Friday because we got plans. But with that being said, no, you also mentioned kind of last season looking different and things like that. Same thing with linebacker, where Buddha's kind of been, Tariq Buddha has been that guy in the center of the defense, if you will. Not playing center field, obviously, like Alex McLaughlin, but just being that guy at the heart of the defense. What's interesting is having Devin Bryant listed as that second starter. Even though we might not always see both of them on the field, all the time, it's like a true 2-down linebacker set, because with the 5-down front, you're probably either going to have, and that's what makes, again, as I'm saying that, it's like, well, you could have Alex, you could have TJ, you could have Leroy, you could have a number of different guys playing that kind of second level of defense and still have guys in the secondary behind him. And so that's what I'm just really intrigued to see with this whole Ryan Walters defense comes to fruition. And as much as we want to say it will be great to see it on Saturday, we're really not going to see it until probably that Wazoo game at Mess, because, UC Davis is, two opponents that you should take care of rather easily, but still lends to say you still need to handle your business, still need to show a little bit of your cards. And that's what I'm thinking, like how much will Ryan Walters tip his hand with some of the stuff on Saturday?
So I like where you're going with that. I don't necessarily know if there's one right answer for this. But the biggest thing is, especially with a team like this, where I think the one thing that we should point out is, although we are much more confident in terms of the way the team is going to play out because they've been together for so much longer, is there are actually more new players on this roster than there were on last season's roster in terms of the turnover from one year to the next. I believe it was 42 last season and it's 44 this year. There's still a significant amount of new pieces. So when we look at that in terms of the defense, it's going to be a little interesting because I think that Ryan Walters still might not necessarily show a lot, because a lot of it is somewhat simplistic in terms of the coverages and some of the different things you're going to do in terms of on the front and back end and how it might, mesh together. But why not just figure out, show as much as possible, because you want to figure it out yourself. And I think that's a big part of this, where we're probably going to see a lot of 5-down. We're going to see a lot of 4-down as well, because they want to be multiple. They want to show you as many different things as possible and then just adjust according to personnel, which is great. That's the way that you want to do something like this. So if early on we do see a lot of 5-down fronts and maybe a couple exotic blitzes here and there in terms of stunts and twists and different things like that, great. It wouldn't be a huge surprise to me if that's the way that this goes, because that's what these first couple of games are for, especially with a bye week before Washington State. You want to make sure that you have as much of that figured out as possible.
And as you were making all those good points there, it made me kind of go back to one thing that I am slightly surprised about, which was the with Zach Durfee and Isaiah Ward, where we had seen Zach Durfee be out there for the majority of when we were allowed to be out there in the early part of August, but not seeing Isaiah Ward be a part of that. Like you mentioned, like there's a lot of new pieces coming back. Those are two specific pieces that were a part of last year's team, but because Durfee was hurt and Ward was battling some things, you never truly got to see the potential of both of them certainly together. So that's what kind of makes this whole thing intriguing, where you have Jacob Lane listed on the other side. Hayden Moore, also a guy that we talked about on the prediction show, being now listed as a backup in that regard. Just how does that front come together? I think that the packages is what I'm more curious to see than anything, because it's not, we know what the result's probably going to be. It's what does it look like getting to that result that to me is going to be most intriguing.
There are also a couple of really intriguing matchups that we have to get into with this game against Colorado State. And we'll get to that right after a message from our friends over at Rugiet. Guys, you've probably heard of Viagra or Cialis. Maybe you've even tried them. But if you're looking for something beyond the usual pill, it's time to meet Rugiet Ready. Rugiet Ready is a next-gen prescription treatment designed to amplify arousal in the brain and boost blood flow. Unlike the usual pills that can take hours, Rugiet's 3-in-1 formula dissolves under your tongue and kicks in fast, on average in 15 minutes. Effects can last up to 36 hours, so you can stay confident and in control when the moment's right. If traditional options haven't worked, Rugiet might be the answer. Over 150,000 men have already made the switch. Head to Rugiet.com/LockdownCollege and use code LockdownCollege to get 15% off today. That's RUGIET.com/LockdownCollege and use promo code LockdownCollege for 15% off. Individual results may vary with prescription treatment. Compounded drugs are permitted to be prescribed under federal law, but are not FDA approved and do not undergo FDA safety, effectiveness, or manufacturing review. Please visit the Rugiet website for full safety information. We have an important request. Locked On wants to hear from you. We've put together a survey to learn more about our listeners and make your favorite podcasts even better. This is your chance to tell us what you like, what you don't, and answer questions about our advertising. Go to lockdownpodcast.com/survey to get started. Everyone who completes the survey will be entered for a chance to win one of 10 $100 Amazon gift cards. Again, that's lockdownpodcast.com/survey. You can also find the link down below in the show notes. Thank you so much for helping us out. So, Lars, as we look into this matchup against Colorado State, one thing I'm really curious about, we're talking a lot about the defense. Let's stay on that side of the ball for a minute, because as we look at quarterback Brayden Fowler-Nicolosi, one thing that I had written down that I wanted to mention that I totally forgotten about, but was a really big story around the time of the transfer portal last season, was it was alleged that there was a Power 4 team that was willing to offer him $600,000 to transfer. That didn't happen. And he said he wanted to stay with Colorado State. And this is somebody who's got 28 games under his belt in his career, I believe the number is. And I believe 22 of those are starts. I could be a little off on that. But no matter what, this is a really experienced quarterback. And without Torrey Horton, who's now with the Seattle Seahawks, maybe, the passing attack doesn't have quite the same threat in terms of the receivers that he has. But I look at this quarterback, and I think that he's going to be a really fun matchup early in the season for Washington secondary, because we've spent a lot of time talking about this big, long duo of Tacario Davis and Ephesians Prysock, and now with Leroy Bryant expected to start in the nickel. That's a really fun trio of guys to have matched up against receivers. And I just think that while he might not necessarily be, a true top-of-the-line Power 4 talent, somebody like Brayden is a really good option in just terms of starting your season with not necessarily a true tune-up game, where I think it's going to be a fun battle.
I mean, week 0, I still hate calling it week 0, but the Stanford-Hawaii game showed you anything. You can't really take any veteran quarterback lightly. And I think this is kind of, like you mentioned, a good test. But I think more so it's a matter of how do these guys communicate well together? How does it come together on game day when, we don't know how many fans are going to be in attendance, but what do you think? 50,000+ at least for sure. It's a lot more. It's a lot more than what they've been practicing for the mock game and things like that. So getting Alex Miller and Tacario on the same page when it comes to just communication and things like that. Who ends up being the quarterback when you talk about having that 5-man, 5 down front with one linebacker? Is it Buddha? Is it McLaughlin? I think there's a number of guys who could possibly wear it. And so I think that's going to be more intriguing to, combat that battle than anything, because I agree it's a good test. But to me, UW has the horses to where they can do it. It's just a matter of, can you actually communicate? Because one of the things we saw pretty well in fall camp was that communication. Can you still carry that over for the final, couple of weeks of fall camp into the season?
No, absolutely. That's a good point, because that's what it's all about. Like that's what all of this is this is a good enough tune-up where he has decent enough ball placement and is just a talented enough guy to test you. Again, it's not like you're facing some of these talents where, like Luke Altmaier, for example, who's by far the most experienced quarterback on Washington's schedule this season, just in terms of Big Ten Power 4, that level. But I just look at Brayden, and I think that this is a fun battle in terms of what he brings to the table, what these wide receivers are going to be able to do, where if we see one of them step up, yeah, sure, it's going to be a lot of fun to watch. But as you said, I do think that Washington has the guys to match up with him. It's just not like a true, one of these FCS sort of tests where it's, okay, yeah, Washington should be expected to come in and win by 60. I know our good friends at FanDuel have the line at 19.5, I believe is where I saw it last time. So there's still a lot to like, and Washington should still be expected to win, but it's just this isn't just your run-of-the-mill regular test. Like, this is a guy who's got just seen a lot of college football.
In a way, does it remind you of UW's backup quarterback, Kai Horton? Because I think that's kind of what's what comes to mind when Jedd Fisch said on Monday that is 60-40 split with, scout team being 60%, and ideally you'll probably work it back to 50-50, as the week goes along. But that's kind of why you bring in a veteran quarterback like that, not just to help them on, but it's to test your defense. It's to, prove, hey, we have a good veteran backup, because Tristan Keene-McMillan and Dash Bradley are both solid good quarterbacks, but they're both freshmen. And if you have a sophomore quarterback and 2 freshmen, there's not going to be a lot of, hey, a couple years in college football, I've seen this, I've done that. Kai Horton being from Tulane, working with Michael Pratt, he knows ball. And so I think that's kind of where this might help UW, just in preparation for it. Is DeMond's obviously going to be his own threat, but I think having a true kind of veteran quarterback like that might actually be the secret to not UW's defensive success, but when it comes to their preparation, more likely than not.
So let's take the same conversation to the other side of the ball, where there's a really nice just pair of experienced edge rushers in the same light, where they're not top of the line guys. We're talking about Paul Tangelo and Jaquez Evans, where a couple of senior edge rushers who, again, have just seen their fair share of college football. And that's one of, if not the biggest question that I've seen from Washington fans throughout the spring, throughout the summer. All our everydayers are asking in the comments all the time is, what is this offensive line going to look like? And Jedd Fisch believes that it's going to be a lot better. You and I have been impressed with what we've seen in terms of practices, where there have certainly been days where the offensive line has gotten the better of the defensive line. I know the mock game was a different story, so people have their questions still, and rightfully so. And that's why this is such an interesting test, where if we see Carver, Willis, and Azzopardi hold up and they're winning consistently, is that hey, this offensive line is going to be world beaters? No, not necessarily. But is it still a sign that it's taking a step in the right direction against a just quality group of 5 kind of opponent? Yeah, and I think you should be more than happy with that. And that's just kind of what I want to see, because, we spent a lot of time talking about this Pocky Finau, John Mills battle and what the interior of the offensive line is going to look like. But so much of it is going to fall on these tackles. And we saw Azzopardi struggle last season. We saw the revolving door at left tackle last season. And I do believe that those days are behind us at both of those positions, but you still have to show it on the field. And that's where this combination of guys comes in handy, where, again, they're not world beaters, but they're solid enough players where it's going to provide a solid test for you.
And you mentioned John Mills in that discussion. What I'm intrigued to see is, how do they use those edges in different ways? Because you have strength to tackle. The weaknesses in the interior, like you mentioned, not necessarily with Landon, but just, Guerin being a transfer in and Champ Taulealea, right guard, being behind him. And then we already had the discussion about John and Pocky. But between those two, I wonder how much do you test those two guys with those edge rushers, which trying to create some mismatches and things like that. Because, to me, when you have good talent and you're outmatched, defensive coaches and good coaches know how to find ways to usurp that. And, you talk about this kind of full circle here with Jay Norvell and everything. He's a very veteran coach. He knows how to build a program. Again, he doesn't do it at the P4 level, but he's, been successful certainly on the offensive side, kind of just building and cultivating talent. And so for me, it's how do you use that talent knowing you don't have the advantage at tackle, but you might have it on the interior? Because if John Mills doesn't really get tested by some of these defensive linemen, how much of a test is it? How much does he maybe go out to tackle if Carver and
I don't see that happening?
Because again, I don't think it's going to happen. Certainly not this week. But you just have to think, how are they going to test those guys? Because Colorado State knows that's where the weakness is on the interior.
Sure, but that's one of the things where, when you and I have talked about this throughout the summer, it's great having veterans at center and right guard in the Hatchet brothers, where with Landon at center, I feel like early on we're going to see him help no matter who the left guard is, if it's Pocky or if it's John Mills. And if you feel that he can hold up one-on-one against a defensive tackle, great, that's awesome. And that shows why he's, in line to take as many snaps as possible. And it's also why you bring back a veteran guy like Guerin Hatchet in the transfer portal from Oklahoma, where it's just that trust factor that we didn't see last season. And you tried that experience with several guys, with D'Angelo T.T. Lee at center, with Enoch Vimaha at right guard. You saw them make that attempt, but it's just a little bit different. And I think that's one of the reasons that you go and you prioritize a guy like Guerin Hatchet, where, especially playing next to his brother, it's, if he's an average conference level player for you, That's great. You're happy with that because of some of the talent that you have, especially on the other side of the line when we have this discussion about left guard. But it's also just someone who knows how to communicate with the guys around him. And it's someone who you can trust to hold up for a couple seconds in one-on-one pass protection at various points in time. It's certainly not going to be every time, but for, whether it's John Mills who gets to start or Paki Finau, it's going to be the first start for either of those guys. And for John, obviously his first playing time of any sort at the college level. So when you have a veteran center like that, why are you not going to shift over in a lot of these, just traditional 4-man pass rushes and just kind of trust the other guys to hold up, which is where I'm just really intrigued at, especially what these tackles are going to be able to do.
Yeah, and like Jedd Fisch mentioned, they have 7, 6, 7, 8 guys, and as Jed said, potentially more. So along the offensive line that they feel pretty confident in going into the season, I would probably put that number at 7. That's a fair number because if you look at certain backups behind him, the one factor that does intrigue me is like Zach Henning and all that. Where does he fit in? The one other thing that I kind of did want to touch on that's a side note is the one thing that's intriguing to me that Jedd Fisch did talk about was Ethan Mitrowski handing kickoffs. And I think that to me, when UW struggled in a way, at kickoff coverage, kick coverage, special teams really in general at that point, we did see a lot of touchbacks from Ethan this fall. So him getting the nod over Grady doing both. I'm curious to see how does that impact things? Is Ethan able just to make it, a touchback fest? Because to me, that's kind of if you're Jedd Fisch, what you're hoping for, so that you can give your defense consistent starting position, take the ball out of their hands, don't let them get any chance to have a massive return on you. Because in these week 1 early games, that's kind of how teams end up winning, is they sneak something past you in an area that maybe you lacked in, which is why, again, Jedd Fisch emphasized every single area of the team, including special teams this offseason.
Lars, as always, thank you so much for being here. Thank you all the players for tuning in. We really do appreciate your support. We got so much more fun stuff coming for you throughout the season. So please make sure you subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, whether that's YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music. We're there. We're everywhere. We're updating this channel with new content every single day. So please make sure you click that like button, click that little bell, so you know when we post a new show. Plus, if you need questions, comments, concerns, up right down below in the comment section. And if you're audio only, please give us a 5-star review, as it does help us out a lot. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll talk to you on Wednesday.